Derek Leits was born in 1991 in a small town in Wisconsin. His mother, Shelley, was only 17 years old when she gave birth to him. She was alone, scared, and had no support from family or the child's father. Despite her young age and lack of experience, she did everything she could to care for her newborn. When Derek was just a few months old, he fell seriously ill with pneumonia. Doctors weren't sure he would survive, and Shelley spent sleepless nights in the hospital praying and watching over him. When he finally recovered, something shifted inside her. That near-death experience created a deep emotional bond between mother and son, but also a strong sense of guilt and fear. From that point on, she vowed to give Derek anything he wanted. She believed that protecting him meant never saying no, never letting him feel pain, and shielding him from every hardship. As Derek grew older, his personality began to show signs of something more troubling. Unlike most children, he didn't like playing with others. He was quiet but not shy, more withdrawn, as if the world outside his home didn't interest him. He didn't laugh easily, and when he didn't get his way, he didn't cry. He became cold and unresponsive. He had no interest in school, rarely made eye contact, and preferred to be alone in his room. When other kids tried to play with him, he pushed them away. Shelley, convinced he was just different, never sought help or guidance. She believed that her love was enough. Derek became extremely possessive of his surroundings. He controlled what TV shows were played in the house, insisted on sitting in the same chair every day, and became furious if anything in his room was moved. When he didn't get what he wanted, he would go silent for hours or refuse to eat. Shelley, unsure of how to handle his moods, always gave in. Every time she tried to set a boundary, his cold demeanor and unspoken anger made her back down. Over time, the balance of power in the household quietly shifted. Derek, even as a child, began to take control. He didn't shout or throw tantrums. His dominance was quiet but absolute. Shelley isolated herself from friends and avoided discussing Derek's behavior with anyone. She believed no one would understand her son like she did. This isolation only deepened her dependence on Derek and convinced her even more that she was the only one who could truly help him. As the years passed, her world became smaller, revolving entirely around her son's unpredictable moods and unusual demands. People in town noticed how withdrawn Derek was, but Shelley defended him every time. She saw no red flags, only a child who needed extra love and protection. By the time Derek reached his teenage years, the warning signs had grown louder, but Shelley continued to silence them. She couldn't see what was happening, that her desire to protect him had created someone who never learned empathy, limits, or consequences. In her effort to save her son, she had unknowingly created a ticking time bomb, and it was only a matter of time before it would go off. As Derek entered his teenage years, the tension in the house grew heavier. What had once been unusual habits turned into disturbing patterns. He barely left his room and refused to engage with anyone unless it benefited him. Shelley continued to enable his behavior, still believing she was doing the right thing. Her fear of upsetting him kept her from challenging his choices. When she did try to talk to him, Derek would stare blankly, giving no reaction. His silence spoke louder than words. It was as though he held the entire household hostage with his mere presence. Around this time, Shelley met a man named Robert. He was kind, supportive, and seemed genuinely interested in helping both her and Derek. At first, Robert tried to bond with Derek, but the boy kept his distance. He refused to make eye contact and ignored every attempt at connection. Robert began to notice how Shelley allowed Derek to run the household. Rules didn't exist for him. He ate whenever he wanted, stayed up all night, and spoke to his mother however he pleased. Robert gently suggested that Derek needed boundaries. Shelley, though hesitant, agreed to let Robert take a more active role in Derek's upbringing. When Robert moved in, he introduced structure into the home. He enforced regular mealtimes, set curfews, and expected basic manners. At first, Derek resisted quietly. Then came the stares, the long silences, and the unnerving stillness that filled the house whenever he was angry. Robert held firm, determined to instill discipline. But Derek didn't argue. He didn't scream or fight. He simply stopped responding altogether, and it created an unsettling atmosphere that made even the simplest tasks feel tense. Holidays became especially difficult. On one Christmas morning, Robert planned a special breakfast before anyone could open presents. Derek, used to getting his way, tried to rush straight to the gifts. Robert stopped him, insisting on breakfast first. Derek sat at the table but didn't touch his food. Hours passed, and he didn't move. Shelley, trying to support Robert, kept quiet, but inside, she was breaking. When Robert left for work the next day, Shelley gave Derek the present in secret. He didn't thank her. Instead, he smashed the gift against the wall without a word, then walked away as if nothing had happened. Shelley knew things were getting worse, but she felt helpless. Her loyalty to her son conflicted with her guilt, and her marriage suffered. The growing divide between Robert and Derek eventually tore them apart. Robert filed for divorce, unable to continue living in a house ruled by fear. Once he left, Derek's grip over the household tightened. Shelley's emotional health began to spiral. She felt like she was living with a stranger, someone unpredictable and cold. Still, she couldn't bring herself to turn against her son. Even when he started making threats, displaying an obsession with control, and showing signs of emotional instability, she held on to the belief that he just needed time, love, and patience. But beneath the surface, something darker was festering, something far beyond her ability to fix. For a brief period, it seemed like Derek's life was turning around. Just before his 18th birthday, he met Macy, a bright and cheerful girl who was the complete opposite of him. She was outgoing, full of energy, and had a natural warmth that drew people in. Somehow, she saw something in Derek that others didn't. Against all odds, the two started dating. Derek's behavior noticeably changed. He smiled more often, began to engage in conversations, and even followed some basic rules at home. Shelley saw this as a miracle. For the first time in years, she felt hopeful. She believed that Macy had awakened something human in her son that had long been buried. Within a year, Macy became pregnant. Though the couple was young and unprepared, Shelley welcomed the news with excitement. She suggested that Macy move in with them so she could help with the baby. Neither Derek nor Macy had finished school, but they agreed. For a short while, the household seemed to experience peace. The arrival of their baby, Gabriel, brought new life into the home. Derek appeared to be a devoted father. He cooked meals, changed diapers, played with the child, and even smiled as he rocked Gabriel to sleep. The transformation was so dramatic that even those close to the family started to believe Derek had turned over a new leaf. But slowly, the cracks began to reappear. Derek became increasingly rigid. He started making strict rules about how things should be done in the house. Every small task had to follow his exact preferences: how the bed was made, how food was cooked, even how long the curtains could stay open. He began creating lists of meals he wanted prepared and insisted they be followed to the letter, regardless of the time or situation. Shelley and Macy found themselves walking on eggshells, trying to avoid triggering his temper. Control extended beyond the household. When Macy started working after finishing school, Derek insisted on knowing her exact schedule. He timed how long it took her to get to and from work and became furious if she was even a minute late. The warmth he once showed began to fade. He no longer smiled and instead monitored everything with cold detachment. He began to isolate Macy, restricting her contact with friends and family. The house, once filled with the sound of a child's laughter, became eerily quiet. Shelley, who had once believed love and patience could fix her son, started to feel the weight of reality. She slipped back into old habits and turned to alcohol for comfort, drowning her fears in silence. She no longer recognized her son and could feel the fear growing inside her. Derek's behavior grew more alarming. He showed signs of paranoia and became possessive of both Macy and Gabriel. He kept to himself but observed everyone, always watching, always listening. One night, Shelley found him cleaning a rifle at the kitchen table. The sight terrified her, but she said nothing. She couldn't. The control Derek had over the house was now complete, and beneath that silence, something sinister was beginning to stir. Life inside the house had become suffocating. Derek's grip on everything and everyone tightened with each passing day. His obsession with control escalated to disturbing levels. He no longer allowed Gabriel to play outside, claiming it was unsafe. The boy, still too young to understand, spent his days indoors under strict supervision. Any noise that disrupted Derek's idea of order would set him off. The joyful child who once filled the home with energy was growing quieter, retreating into silence. Macy, once full of light, began to fade under the pressure. She was no longer just restricted, she was living in fear. Derek's rules turned into commands. No one questioned them. The atmosphere became heavy, as if even the walls knew something was wrong. Shelley, now consumed by anxiety and guilt, had started drinking again. Her room became her hiding place. She stayed behind closed doors, venturing out only when absolutely necessary. The woman who had once promised to make her son happy was now terrified of him. She rarely made eye contact, and when she did, it was only to avoid provoking him. She knew something terrible was coming. She just didn't know when. The turning point arrived quietly, like the calm before a storm. Macy had reached her breaking point. She could no longer live under Derek's control. The emotional and mental abuse had escalated to physical threats. She had become afraid not only for herself, but for Gabriel. She decided to leave. On her 18th birthday, while Derek was out, Macy packed her things quickly and slipped away. She left Gabriel behind, believing it was the only way to keep both of them safe. Shelley, though devastated, helped her escape. She knew it was the right thing to do, even if it meant facing Derek's fury alone. When Derek returned and discovered Macy was gone, his reaction was chilling. He didn't shout or throw anything. He sat in silence, staring into space, his expression unreadable. Shelley expected rage, but there was none. Derek simply stood up and went to his room, closing the door behind him. What he was thinking remained a mystery, but Shelley could feel that something inside him had shifted. The next day, she found him pacing the living room, repeating the same words over and over, "Gabriel will never call another man Dad." It wasn't just a sentence. It was a threat cloaked in a mantra. She tried asking him what was wrong, but he ignored her, lost in whatever thoughts consumed him. Afraid she would be late for work, she left the house, uneasy and shaken. That would be the last time she saw the house the way it was. By the next day, everything had changed. When she returned home, the front door was ajar. Macy's car was in the driveway. The silence inside was different this time, colder, heavier. Bloodstains led her to the bathroom. Locked inside was Macy, lifeless in the tub. Gabriel was gone, and Derek had vanished. The nightmare she had feared for years had finally come true. The house was filled with a darkness Shelley could no longer escape. When she discovered Macy's lifeless body, it felt like the world had stopped moving. Her heart pounded in her chest as she frantically searched for Gabriel, calling out his name, but there was no answer. The house felt so empty now, empty in a way that made her stomach turn. It was clear that Derek was no longer the son she had once known, and in that moment, Shelley realized the monster her son had become. She called the police, her voice shaking with fear and desperation. She couldn't understand how Derek had descended into this madness. He had been her baby, the child she had loved and cared for, and now he was a cold-blooded killer. Shelley stood by helplessly, unable to do anything as the officers arrived and took control of the scene. They found the bloodstains that matched Derek's shoes, the weapon, a kitchen knife, left carelessly behind, and the horrifying evidence of what had transpired. There was no doubt now. Derek had murdered Macy, and he had taken Gabriel with him. The police had no time to waste. Derek was the prime suspect, and they issued an Amber Alert for Gabriel. Shelley, still reeling from the shock of what she had just discovered, felt as though she had been cast into a nightmare. She had never imagined this for her son. She thought of all the missed signs, the warning signals she had ignored out of fear. How had she let it go on for so long? The guilt threatened to consume her as the police worked quickly to track down Derek. The next morning, a breakthrough came. Derek checked into a small hotel a few miles from their home, carrying Gabriel with him. The hotel clerk, who recognized Derek from the Amber Alert, wisely pretended not to know anything. He treated Derek just as he would any other guest, maintaining a calm, friendly demeanor. After Derek went to his room, the clerk made a call to the authorities, leading them to the hotel. When the police arrived, Derek didn't resist. He was arrested without a struggle. Gabriel, miraculously unharmed, was taken into protective custody. Derek, still wearing the same clothes he had worn when the crime was committed, was a walking crime scene. Blood from Macy stained his shoes, a clear connection to the murder. The police were able to recover the knife used in the killing, and the evidence mounted against him. At the station, Derek was given a chance to make a phone call. He called his mother. Shelley, in her heartache, listened to her son apologize, but there was no real emotion in his voice. It was cold, calculated. It was the first time Derek had ever told her he loved her. The words felt hollow, meaningless in the face of what he had done. As the case moved forward, Shelley struggled with conflicting emotions. She wanted to protect her son, but how could she defend someone capable of such brutality? The court proceedings were a blur, but Derek ultimately accepted a plea deal. He pled guilty to the murder of Macy, sparing the family a long, drawn-out trial. His sentence was life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Shelley couldn't even bring herself to feel relief. It was a hollow victory. Macy was laid to rest in a funeral marked by sorrow and anger. Shelley, left to care for her grandson, made the painful decision to leave the home she had shared with Derek. The house held too many memories, too many reminders of what had happened. She moved far away, choosing to live in seclusion where no one knew her story, where she could raise Gabriel away from the ghosts of the past. In the years that followed, Shelley vowed to give Gabriel a different life. She knew she could never undo the damage Derek had caused, but she would do everything in her power to ensure that Gabriel's story was not defined by his father's actions. Shelley raised him with love, providing a stable, nurturing environment far from the chaos of their past. And though the guilt of what happened never left her, she hoped that, by raising Gabriel differently, she could break the cycle of violence that had plagued their family.